Avery Sullivan had learned to recognize bad news before she finished reading it. The language was always polished, almost kind, as if disappointment became less painful when wrapped in professional courtesy. That evening, while Charlotte glittered beyond the windows of the marketing agency, the message on her phone informed her that the campaign had been cancelled and her contract would end with it. Her manager thanked her for her dedication. Avery stared at those words until they blurred. She had rewritten the proposal countless times, rebuilt presentations, adjusted budgets, and worked late enough to forget what evening felt like. None of it mattered now. She called her mother, Margaret Sullivan, a respected communications executive, whose calendar seemed planned months ahead. Margaret answered with a message saying she was in a meeting. Avery typed that she had lost another job, erased it, then wrote that everything was fine. Her father, Daniel, was an architect whose name appeared on buildings Avery passed without thinking. When she called him, an assistant answered. Daniel was visiting a construction site. Avery said she had only wanted to say hello. At the family apartment, expensive furniture stood exactly where designers had intended it. Framed photographs showed graduations, awards, vacations, smiling faces. Everything suggested achievement. Avery warmed dinner and ate alone at a table built for people who rarely arrived together. In her bedroom, she found a knitted scarf made years earlier by her grandmother, Abigail. Holding it brought back memories of a kitchen that smelled of bread and dried leaves, a dog racing through a dusty yard, and an old man complaining because nobody respected his tools. Her phone vibrated. Abigail had sent a video from Wadmalaw Island, South Carolina. The image shook because her grandmother had never learned to hold a phone steadily. Avery saw rows of tea and herbs moving beneath a warm coastal breeze. Her grandfather, Isaac, stood among them examining leaves. Baxter, their energetic dog, ran past carrying one of Isaac's gloves. "Baxter!" Isaac shouted somewhere beyond the camera. Abigail laughed so hard the picture tilted toward the ground. Nimbus, the gray cat, slept on a porch step without caring about the commotion. Finally, Abigail turned the camera toward herself. Flour covered her apron. "I don't know whether this thing is recording properly," she said. "Your grandfather says I'm terrible at it, but he can't even find the camera button." The video ended. Beneath it was a message. "If you're tired, come stay with us a while. The tea smells wonderful this season." Avery cried then, quietly and without understanding why those simple words had broken through everything she had held inside. The invitation asked nothing from her. No plan, no achievement, no explanation. The next morning, she booked a trip south and told herself she would stay 1 month. Margaret worried she was hiding from failure. Daniel offered contacts who might find her another position. "Thank you," Avery told him, "but I don't need another opportunity immediately. I need somewhere I can hear myself think." Margaret called later. "A month is a long time to disappear." "I am not disappearing. I didn't mean it that way. But you thought it." Silence followed. Avery packed simple clothes, comfortable shoes, her laptop, an old camera, and Abigail's scarf. During the journey south, highways gave way to marshes, live oaks, narrow roads, and stretches of green that seemed to breathe differently from the city. Avery resisted opening her laptop. She watched the landscape instead. Isaac and Abigail were waiting when she arrived. Abigail embraced her before she could put down her suitcase. Isaac examined her seriously. "You look thin. I missed you too, Grandpa." "If you missed us, you could have visited sooner." Then he took her luggage, despite Avery's protest. "You carried it all this way. Now it's my turn." At the old white farmhouse, Baxter nearly knocked her over with enthusiasm. Nimbus immediately climbed onto her suitcase and went to sleep. Abigail had prepared tea, orange preserves, warm bread, and the honey tea cake Avery remembered from childhood. Avery lifted the cup with both hands. Nothing had been repaired. Her job was still gone. Her parents still felt impossibly distant. Her future remained uncertain. Yet surrounded by Abigail's flour-stained apron, Isaac's quiet presence, Baxter beneath the table, and Nimbus occupying property that did not belong to him, Avery discovered something she had forgotten. She could breathe without first earning permission. Isaac's mornings began earlier than Avery believed any reasonable morning should. On her first day, sunlight was already filling the bedroom when she heard his voice through the open window. If the lady from Charlotte plans to wake up after the leaves have dried, someone should tell the plants to wait. Avery dressed quickly and hurried outside. Isaac looked at her shoes. Those are city shoes. They're comfortable. They won't be after this hill finishes with them. He showed her how to harvest tender leaves without crushing them. Avery approached the task as she approached work, carefully at first, then urgently, determined to prove she could learn fast. She squeezed one leaf too hard. Isaac stared at it. "You're not harvesting. You're arguing with the plant." "I'm trying. The leaf doesn't know what you intended. It only knows how your hands treated it." The sentence stung, because Avery had heard colder versions in offices, where effort mattered only when results pleased someone. She almost withdrew. Instead, she said, "Show me again." Isaac placed her fingers correctly. "Gentler. The plant isn't responsible for whatever hurry you brought here." That stayed with her. Perhaps she had carried Charlotte inside her body, in her shoulders, her breathing, even the way she touched a leaf. By noon, she had ruined her shoes and collected a mixture that Isaac described as not entirely hopeless. Beside the farmhouse door, she later found new work boots and gloves. "Thank you," she called. Isaac continued walking. "Your other shoes were embarrassing the family." Abigail laughed when Avery told her. That afternoon, Avery helped bake honey tea rolls. She measured poorly, kneaded too aggressively, and burned the first tray after Baxter stole a kitchen towel and sent everyone chasing him. Nimbus climbed onto the table beside the flour. "I am terrible at everything here," Avery groaned. Abigail broke open a burnt roll and smelled its center. "No, you're learning. In Charlotte, if you learn too slowly, somebody replaces you." Abigail set the bread down. "That's one reason you're not in Charlotte today." A few days later, Avery began filming. Not strategically. She simply became afraid she might forget. She recorded Abigail's hands folding dough, steam curling above teacups, Isaac repairing baskets, Baxter stealing objects, and Nimbus placing himself directly in front of the lens, with complete confidence that any camera existed for him. Avery posted several short clips. The response surprised her. People wrote that Abigail reminded them of their mothers. Others wanted to know what Isaac grew. Many laughed at Baxter. Some said the videos gave them several peaceful minutes during exhausting days. One message came from a woman whose grandmother had died years earlier. Watching Abigail pour tea, she wrote, had made grief hurt and comforted her at the same time. Avery walked downstairs and hugged her grandmother from behind. "What happened?" Abigail asked. "Nothing. Nothing can be very heavy. I just wanted to hug you." Abigail accepted that answer. At the weekend market, Avery discovered another world worth remembering. Local families sold honey, preserves, dried herbs, bread, tea mixtures, and handmade goods. There she met Evelyn, an older widow famous for honey tea cakes that younger shoppers increasingly ignored. Avery asked permission before filming her stall. "Use this side," Evelyn instructed, turning her face. "It's the side that still has some dignity." Nearby stood Grant Monroe, who worked with the local growers cooperative. He was 29, sun-browned, serious, and clearly unimpressed by Avery's camera. "You're posting these people online. Only when they agree. For what? Because their work matters." Grant folded his arms. "People from cities come here, film their peaceful little escape, collect attention, and leave. We keep the traffic, trash, rising prices, and promises nobody remembers." Avery stiffened. "I'm visiting my grandparents." "Then visit them. Don't turn their home into scenery for strangers." The words followed her back to the farmhouse. For several days she stopped filming. Then Evelyn confronted her at the market. "I have a complaint." Avery braced herself. "You stopped recording me. I thought that might be more respectful." "Respectful to whom? Nobody asked me." Evelyn explained that visitors had recognized her from Avery's video and bought her cakes. "They knew my name," she said quietly. "Do you know how strange that feels when you've spent years thinking nobody outside this market cares?" Another seller had sold extra herbs. Someone else had received orders for preserves. Evelyn touched Avery's arm. "If you invent stories about us and leave, that's taking. If you ask, listen, name us, and let us speak for ourselves. Maybe that's different." That evening, Avery understood that the question was not whether she should tell stories. It was whether the people inside them remained people after the camera turned on. Avery returned to the market with a different habit. She looked first. She asked second. She filmed last. When Evelyn told her that the honey tea cake recipe had come from her mother and grandmother, Avery listened without reaching for her phone. Evelyn explained that her late husband once traveled a long distance to buy a particular honey because he insisted its scent gave the cake its soul. Only after the story ended did Avery ask whether Evelyn wanted to tell it on camera. Evelyn straightened her apron. "Only if you promise not to make me look exhausted." The video was simple. No dramatic music. No exaggerated captions. Evelyn's hands wrapped a cake in paper while she spoke about her husband, the honey, and why she still toasted the edges slightly darker than most bakers would. Within days, people began visiting her stall specifically. Evelyn ran out of cakes. She handed Avery a small package containing honey, fruit, dried flowers, and an old embroidered handkerchief. "For helping people remember my name." Avery tried to refuse it. Evelyn insisted. "I thought my cake was becoming something from another age. You reminded me that old doesn't always mean finished." When Avery's month ended, leaving hurt more than arriving ever had. Abigail packed enough food for what she described as any emergency between here and civilization. Isaac gave Avery several tea blends and strict instructions about when each should be used. Baxter followed her suitcase. Nimbus lay on top of it. At the station, Abigail hugged her hard. "Come back because you mean it," she whispered. "Not because people say grandchildren should. I mean it." Back in Charlotte, the apartment felt even colder than before. Avery opened job listings: content strategist, campaign coordinator, brand manager. They were respectable jobs. She felt nothing. Then she opened the folder containing Evelyn's video. The handkerchief lay beside her laptop. For years, Avery had assumed she lacked talent because work kept ending, and because success beside her parents always seemed smaller. Perhaps her ability had not been worthless. Perhaps she had been using it in places where she did not care about what she was asked to sell. She waited for Daniel and Margaret to come home. "I want to go back to South Carolina," she said. "For another visit?" Daniel asked. "To live there for a while." Margaret stared at her. "Doing what?" Avery described an idea: helping growers, bakers, beekeepers, and small sellers tell their stories and connect directly with visitors without turning the community into a manufactured attraction. "That is not a job," Margaret said. "Not yet." "Then you're moving without stable work." "Yes." Margaret walked toward the window. I spent half my life trying to get away from a place where everyone expected women to stay small. I wanted choices. I wanted my work recognized. And you want to go backward. I'm not choosing a smaller life because it looks smaller to you. Daniel spoke gently. What happens if this fails? Avery's hands trembled. Then I will fail somewhere my life feels like mine. Nobody gave her permission. Nobody stopped her either. That was enough. She returned to Wadmalau Island, carrying 2 suitcases. Abigail placed a hand over her heart. Isaac looked at the luggage. How long? I don't know. Terrible answer. Still the only one I have. Avery began meeting local residents one by one. She proposed something intentionally modest. A small weekend route, connecting visitors with growers and sellers. Guests would learn how tea was harvested, visit the market, taste Evelyn's cake, buy honey and preserves directly, and drink local tea at a cafe run by Grant's younger sister, Sadie, who was 24. Sadie loved the idea, but gave Avery one condition. No buses full of people treating us like a theme park. Agreed. Grant remained cautious. At the first community meeting, he asked Avery the question nobody else wanted to ask. What do you get? A livelihood, maybe, if this works. Purpose, definitely. But ownership? Nothing. The people here keep control. Isaac nodded slowly. If this happens, it happens slowly. Abigail added, and nobody enters another woman's kitchen and tells her how to make her recipe. Evelyn raised her hand. And nobody replaces my honey with cheap syrup. Laughter broke the tension. They called the project the Living Leaf Trail. Its first visitors came in tiny groups. They learned names rather than simply taking photographs. For Avery, that mattered more than numbers. The Living Leaf Trail grew the way Isaac said good plants should, slowly enough for the roots to keep pace. Visitors came on weekends. Grant explained the cooperative. Sadie served tea and local preserves at her cafe. Evelyn told stories while slicing cake. Isaac demonstrated harvesting with the solemnity of someone entrusted with an ancient ceremony. Avery handled schedules, messages, videos, and introductions. For the first time in years, long workdays did not leave her hollow. One evening, Grant found her editing at Abigail's kitchen table. "Remove that part," he said. Avery jumped. "You scared me. Remove the part where I look like I'm lecturing those leaves." "You always look like you're lecturing something." Grant placed a mug beside her. "Tea. Did you make it?" "Yes." She tasted it. "It's good. Careful. Compliments can damage my reputation." The ease between them surprised her. Avery finally asked why he had been so harsh when they met. Grant told her about outsiders who had arrived years earlier promising visibility. They filmed homes and workers, promoted the area aggressively, then vanished when attention moved elsewhere. The town was left with careless visitors, inflated expectations, litter, and distrust. "I thought you were another version of them." "And now?" He hesitated. "Now I see you ask permission. You come back after people criticize you. You listen." Avery looked down. "What you said still hurt." "I know. I was protecting this place so fiercely that I forgot you were learning how to care about it too." It was not a romantic declaration. Nothing between them needed one. Their closeness developed through tea placed beside laptops. Disagreements survived, work shared, and apologies offered without excuses. Then Nathan Archer arrived. He represented a tourism development company. His clothes were casual but immaculate, his watch expensive, his smile polished. "I've been following the Living Leaf Trail," he told Avery. "You have created something extremely valuable." Avery immediately disliked the word valuable. Yet another part of her wanted to hear more. Nathan spoke about sustainable tourism, regional employment, lodging partnerships, professional marketing, improved signs, and expanded visitor packages. A recognizable brand, he said. Sadie raised an eyebrow. A brand? A brand with a soul. Later, Sadie muttered, "Whenever somebody needs to tell you their brand has a soul, count the silverware afterward." Nathan presented his proposal to local residents. Charles Reed, an older farmer, supported exploring it. "We need jobs," Charles argued. "Young people leave because admiration for tradition doesn't pay their bills." He was not wrong. That made the decision harder. Grant challenged Nathan immediately. Who controls what gets shown? The community. Who decides visitor limits? We would develop that collaboratively. Who owns the final brand? Nathan smiled. Those details would be negotiated. Grant looked at Avery. This is how it begins. Afterward, they argued in the square. "You're rejecting everything before reading it," Avery said. "And you're listening because someone finally told you this little project can become big. That is unfair. Is it?" She stepped back as if struck. Grant lowered his voice. "You still want proof that returning here wasn't failure. Nathan knows exactly where that wound is." Avery hated him for saying it because she feared he was right. Before the disagreement could settle, something more frightening happened. During a weekend visit, Abigail insisted on preparing bread, despite looking unusually tired. Avery noticed the paleness in her face. "Grandma, sit down." "After I finish." Abigail reached for the table. The bowl in her hand slipped. Avery caught her grandmother as her knees gave way. Everything else vanished. Visitors, projects, Nathan, social media, even Grant. There was only Abigail's cold hand inside Avery's and Isaac kneeling beside his wife. At the hospital, doctors said exhaustion and low blood pressure had likely contributed. Abigail needed rest and less responsibility. Avery called her parents. Margaret and Daniel arrived during the night. Margaret stopped in the doorway when she saw her mother sleeping. The accomplished executive disappeared. A daughter remained. She sat beside Abigail and held her hand until morning. Back at the farmhouse, fear turned into accusation. "With everything happening here," Margaret said, "how did nobody realize she was this tired?" Avery stared at her. "You mean how did I not realize? You were here. And you weren't." The words came out before Avery could soften them. Margaret went pale. Isaac finally spoke. "This family has never lacked money sent on time. Repairs get paid. Medicine gets bought. We are grateful." He looked at his daughter. "But a house does not become warm because somebody transfers money into it." Margaret lowered her eyes. Isaac's voice softened. "Sometimes old people don't need their lives managed from far away. Sometimes we need somebody to sit down and drink tea without checking the clock." Abigail came home weaker, but determined to prevent everyone from turning her recovery into a funeral. "I am still alive," she complained when she saw their faces. "Try behaving accordingly." Even Isaac laughed. Then Abigail asked everyone to listen. "Nobody needs to sacrifice an entire life for me. Not Avery, not Margaret, not your grandfather, although he enjoys pretending martyrdom is a hobby." "I have never pretended anything," Isaac objected. "You have more pride than bones." This time everyone laughed properly. Abigail continued. "What this house needs is simpler. Enough people around the table occasionally. Tea. Time. Nobody thinking about the next train or meeting." Margaret cried quietly. The living leaf trail paused while Abigail recovered. Margaret stayed, awkwardly relearning her mother's kitchen. Daniel repaired a storage door and began discussing drainage, walls, and old foundations with Isaac. For a few days, Avery believed the crisis had clarified what mattered. Then Sadie burst into the farmhouse holding her phone. You need to see this. A promotional film opened with elegant music. A drone crossed the tea fields. Isaac's hands harvested leaves. Abigail removed bread from the oven. Evelyn wrapped cakes. Baxter ran through the yard. Nimbus slept beside a window. Most of the footage belonged to Avery. A narrator invited wealthy travelers to discover an exclusive rural sanctuary, centered on tea, tradition, and restoration. Nathan's company logo appeared at the end. Avery felt physically cold. She had never approved the advertisement. Neither had the residents. Within hours, the market was boiling with anger. Evelyn packed her stall early. "My husband's story is in that advertisement," she said, eyes red. "They turned it into decoration. I didn't give them permission. But you brought them close." Avery had no defense against that. Grant stood beside the cooperative stall. "I warned you. I know." "You opened the door." "Yes." His anger faltered for a moment. Avery forced herself to continue. "I wanted to believe they could help, and part of me wanted someone important to say what we built was important. I made that easier for Nathan." Grant looked away. Isaac said even less. Back at the farmhouse, he held a dried leaf in his fingers. "When you care for something," he said, "wanting it to grow is not enough. You also protect it from whoever wants to pull it out by the roots." Avery went to her room and finally cried. Margaret knocked. "Go away." "No." Eventually, Avery opened the door. Margaret sat beside her. "This will not be fixed by posting that you never approved the advertisement. I know. If you intend to stay here, then stay now. Don't disappear when people are angry. What if they never forgive me?" "That is not yours to decide." It was the first time Avery heard her mother's professional experience without feeling controlled by it. Margaret continued. "Trust breaks quickly. It returns slowly. Listen before you defend yourself." The following morning, Avery left her phone at home and carried only a notebook. She visited Evelyn first. "I came to apologize." "You already apologized. Yesterday I explained myself. Today I want to listen." Evelyn let her inside. "What hurt most," the older woman said, "wasn't seeing my face. It was hearing some polished voice talk about authentic simplicity, as though my husband's memory were furniture in a luxury hotel." Avery wrote nothing for a while. She simply listened. For days she visited homes and stalls. Some residents welcomed her. Some shouted. One shut the door. Avery never argued. Eventually Grant appeared beside her. "Where are you going?" "To Carol's preserve shop." "I'll come." Together they began gathering statements from residents whose images had been used without consent. Sadie saved copies of the advertisements. Margaret prepared formal complaints. Daniel examined Nathan's development documents. What he discovered was worse than stolen footage. The proposal contained language that could restrict public access roads, relocate the market, and give tourism operations priority over local water use during certain periods. Isaac removed his glasses. "The water?" Daniel nodded. Isaac's expression hardened. "No." Avery finally understood. Nathan did not merely want to promote their community. He wanted to redesign it into something easier to sell. They decided their response would not be another polished advertisement. It would belong to the people who lived there. At sunset, residents gathered in the market square. Some refused to appear, and Avery respected their choice. Those who agreed spoke in their own words. Evelyn faced the camera first. "I am not an exclusive experience. I make honey tea cake because my mother taught me, and her mother taught her. My husband loved the darker edge. Visitors are welcome to buy it. My memories are not available for someone else to package without asking." Carol, who sold preserves, followed. "We want customers. We want income. We do not want somebody moving our market." renaming our products, or controlling our water because it photographs better. A herb farmer lifted his weathered hat. This isn't a costume. I wear it because the sun is hot. Sadie stood outside her cafe. Young people need a future here. But having a future does not mean surrendering the place to the first company with elegant language. Grant spoke next. I used to think protecting this community meant distrusting all change. I was wrong. Change isn't automatically harmful. The question is, who controls it and who benefits? Then Abigail called Avery forward. She resisted. Her mother said nothing, leaving the choice to her. Avery stepped in front of the camera. I made a mistake. I believed good intentions were enough. They weren't. I gave outsiders access before understanding what they wanted. I enjoyed hearing that what we built could become important, and I ignored warning signs because part of me still needed proof that coming here wasn't failure. She swallowed. If the Living Leaf Trail continues, it will operate with consent, limits, shared decisions, and local ownership. If it cannot exist that way, it should not exist. They posted the video. There was no music. Wind interrupted voices. Baxter barked during Evelyn's statement. Nobody edited him out. The video traveled beyond the community. Responsible tourism organizations shared it. Regional journalists began asking about the dispute. Legal complaints over unauthorized images reached Nathan's company. Daniel's analysis of the access and water provisions attracted attention from local officials. Nathan's company eventually removed the promotional material and distanced itself from the proposed project. A carefully written apology followed. Margaret read it once. That isn't an apology, she said. It's damage control. Avery surprised herself by smiling. Months earlier, she would have considered defeating Nathan the ending. Now she understood the harder work had only begun. The Living Leaf Trail was rebuilt from the beginning. Participation became voluntary and documented. Residents determined what could be photographed. Visitor groups stayed small. A portion of revenue went into a community fund for trail maintenance and market improvements. Avery published fewer videos. They became better. Not because production improved, but because she finally understood that visibility was a tool, not a virtue. Evelyn slowly forgave her. One morning, Avery offered to help arrange cakes. You may help, Evelyn said, but if you drop one, you buy it. Does that mean I'm forgiven? It means my back hurts. Don't become sentimental. Sadie developed seasonal menus using cooperative tea, Carol's preserves, and local honey. A retired school teacher named Helen began helping visitors understand the island's history, rather than leaving Avery to explain a community she had only recently returned to. A young grower named Mason joined the cooperative after years of planning to leave. He did not suddenly become wealthy. Nobody did. But for the first time he could imagine staying without feeling that remaining meant giving up ambition. Margaret also returned more often. At first she said she came because Abigail needed assistance. Later, everyone stopped pretending. She began asking her mother to teach her childhood recipes. I don't remember the measurements, Margaret admitted. Because you never listened. You waited for the cake edges. Margaret froze. You remember that? A mother remembers many things her children assume disappeared. That evening Margaret cried, not as an executive, and not as Avery's demanding mother, but as Abigail's daughter. Daniel found his own way back. He helped reinforce an old storage building and redesign a dangerous path without changing its character. Isaac began calling him architect with theatrical suspicion. One afternoon, Daniel explained why an old wall kept cracking. Isaac examined it. So it has been ignored for years, and now everybody is surprised it's damaged. Approximately. Isaac looked toward the farmhouse. Sounds like a family. Neither man laughed. They did not need to. The relationship between Avery and Grant changed just as quietly. There was no dramatic confession. One evening, after the last visitors left, they walked through the fields. Grant noticed her phone remained in her pocket. "Nothing worth filming?" "Plenty." "Then why aren't you?" Avery watched the late sunlight move across the leaves. "Because I spent years thinking I would lose a moment unless I captured it." "And now?" "Now I think some moments stay longer when you give them your whole attention." Grant reached for her hand. Avery let him hold it. For once, neither of them needed words to make the moment larger. By the following season, people outside the island knew the Living Leaf Trail, yet Avery guarded its size more carefully than she once guarded its growth. Requests arrived for larger tours. She declined them. Companies proposed sponsorships. Some were accepted after community review. Most were not. One weekend, a travel producer offered to feature Abigail's kitchen prominently in a national campaign. How much would they pay? Abigail asked. Avery told her. Her grandmother's eyebrows rose. That is an impressive amount of money. So you're interested? No. I was simply admiring how expensive nonsense has become. Isaac laughed hard enough to cough. Avery no longer treated every rejection as a missed opportunity. That change astonished Margaret most. During a visit, mother and daughter sat beneath the porch roof while rain darkened the fields. You used to panic whenever a door closed, Margaret said. I thought every door might be the last one. I may have taught you that. Avery looked at her. Margaret continued before courage disappeared. When you were young, I wanted you to have every opportunity I didn't have. Somewhere along the way, I began treating your choices like investments that had to produce the correct return. You wanted me safe. I wanted you successful. Those aren't always the same thing. No. The word contained more humility than any long apology. Margaret watched Abigail through the kitchen window. When I left here, I promised myself I would never become trapped. I thought staying meant losing. Then you came back voluntarily, and I reacted as though your choice erased everything I fought for. It doesn't. I know that now. Avery leaned back. You gave me choices by leaving. Maybe using those choices means I'm allowed to return. Margaret smiled through wet eyes. That is an annoyingly good argument. I learned communications from someone. Inside, Abigail called them before sentiment became excessive. Avery's work also became more sustainable. She charged clearly for coordination and media services rather than pretending purpose meant she should work for free. The cooperative paid for specific projects. Local sellers contributed modestly to shared promotion. Visitor fees were transparent. Grant respected that. If you burn yourself out helping everybody, he told her, eventually you'll become angry at the people you wanted to help. That sounds unusually wise. I say intelligent things constantly. You just don't document them. Their relationship remained grounded in ordinary work. They argued about schedules. Avery wanted better signage. Grant thought some signs encouraged visitors to stop looking around. Sadie accused them both of enjoying disagreements far too much. Baxter continued stealing gloves. Nimbus grew heavier and more entitled. Isaac remained convinced the cat contributed nothing to the household. Nimbus responded by sleeping in Isaac's chair whenever possible. One autumn morning, Avery noticed Isaac struggling slightly as he carried a basket. Give me that. I've carried baskets longer than you've been alive. And now you've trained somebody else. He stared at her. Then he handed it over. The gesture moved Avery more than praise would have. They walked between rows together. Too many leaves, Isaac said after inspecting her basket. You told me not to be afraid of harvesting. I also told you not to become greedy. You are impossible to satisfy. Good. Keeps you humble. Yet when they reached the drying shed, Isaac quietly separated several of Avery's leaves and placed them among his best selection. She pretended not to notice. That evening, the family gathered for dinner. Daniel had brought plans for restoring a small public shelter near the market. Margaret had brought nothing except herself, which Abigail claimed was evidence of remarkable progress. Sadie stopped by with preserves. Evelyn delivered a cake and threatened anyone who criticized its edges. Grant remained after helping Isaac move several crates. No occasion had been announced. No milestone needed celebrating. They were simply there. Avery once would have considered such an evening unproductive. Now she understood how much work had been required for every person at that table to sit there without rushing away. Abigail poured tea. "Before anybody starts talking about business," she said, "the first sip is taken in silence." Isaac nodded approvingly. Finally, a reasonable rule. Everyone lifted a cup. Avery's phone rested inside the house. She did not go for it. The sun sank behind the fields, while the table filled with ordinary sounds. Spoons touching cups, Baxter breathing beneath a chair, Nimbus protesting because Daniel had attempted to reclaim his seat, Abigail asking whether everyone had eaten enough, and Isaac insisting that tea should never be drowned in sugar. Grant sat beside Avery. Across from them, Margaret listened while Abigail retold a story she had heard many times before. Daniel and Isaac argued about an old wall, with the comfortable seriousness of men who knew the disagreement would continue next week. Nothing about the evening would have impressed the people Avery once worked for. There were no awards, no campaign results, no executive titles worth mentioning, no audience. And still Avery could not remember ever feeling richer. She thought about the woman who had sat alone in Charlotte after losing another contract, surrounded by evidence of other people's success. That woman had believed failure meant being sent backward. She had treated life like a narrow road where everyone respectable moved in the same direction, and anyone who turned around had lost. Returning had taught her otherwise. Sometimes going back was not surrender. Sometimes a person returned because distance had finally shown her what she had overlooked. Avery had also learned that meaningful work did not become good simply because its intentions were beautiful. She had hurt people while believing she was helping them. She had opened a door to Nathan because his praise touched the old wound she still carried, the fear that her smaller life needed outside approval before it counted. Admitting that had changed her more deeply than defeating him. Growing older, she realized, would probably bring many versions of the same lesson. Good intentions would fail sometimes. Judgment would fail. People would disappoint one another without meaning to. Love itself could become clumsy. What mattered was what came afterward. A person could defend herself endlessly, or she could listen. She could run from embarrassment, or remain long enough to repair trust. She could mistake providing for someone as being present for them, as Margaret and Daniel had done for years. Or she could understand what Isaac had tried to say. Money could repair a roof, buy medicine, replace a broken door, and still leave a chair empty at dinner. Avery looked at her grandparents. Age had made time visible in them. Isaac's hands were slower. Abigail tired more easily. No achievement Avery might earn later could purchase another ordinary afternoon after those afternoons were gone. That truth was not tragic to her anymore. It was clarifying. People spent enormous parts of their lives preparing to live later. They endured empty work because someday they would rest. They postponed visits because someday schedules would become easier. They save affection for birthdays, apologies for the right moment, conversations for when everyone is less busy. But life rarely sends an announcement saying that the final ordinary day has arrived. That was why Avery no longer photographed everything. She had discovered a difference between preserving a memory and abandoning the present in order to preserve it. Some things deserved photographs. Others deserved her undivided eyes. She also understood her mother's journey differently. Margaret had not been wrong to leave the island. Avery had not been wrong to return. One generation had needed departure to become free. Another needed the freedom to choose where she belonged. There was no single shape for a worthwhile life. For one person, it might be a tower of offices and ambitious work. For another, it might be a workshop, a classroom, a farm, or a kitchen where an old recipe survived because somebody still remembered how the edges should taste. The dignity came from choosing consciously rather than living as a frightened imitation of somebody else. The living leaf trail would change. The community would argue again. Avery and Grant would disagree. Her parents would sometimes fall back into old habits. Abigail and Isaac would not remain forever at that table. Knowing this did not diminish the happiness before her. It made the moment more valuable. Abigail raised her cup. "To being here," she said. Isaac added, "and to finally teaching Avery not to crush the leaves." Everyone laughed. Avery laughed with them. The tea was warm, slightly bitter, fragrant with earth and honey. She took another sip without reaching for her phone. For years she had searched for proof that her life mattered. At last she understood that a meaningful life was not something displayed convincingly enough for strangers to approve. It was something inhabited. And that evening, with people she loved occupying every mismatched chair around an old wooden table, Avery was completely there.